alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to A Live After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me is a new guest to the show, and I think a first-time author. Welcome to the show, Nicole. And actually, I'm going to have to ask you to pronounce your last name, because I forgot to ask how before the show started.
No worries, it's Haldoupis.
Haldoupis, okay. Nicole Haldoupis, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, it's always good to talk to anyone, really, honestly, especially in this day and age, in this year of pandemics and stuff. But but actually, can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself to get us started?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a writer from Toronto, but I most recently lived in Saskatoon, and now I live in St. John's, Newfoundland. I write primarily fiction, mostly flash fiction. And my first book came out in October. It's called Tiny Ruins. It's published by Radiant Press in Regina.
Cool.
Yeah.
Flash fiction, huh? I mean, that's really interesting to me, actually.
Yeah.
So how long are your flash fictions usually?
They're usually quite short. I would say usually probably 750 words or less.
Okay.
Sometimes quite a bit, even shorter than that.
Yeah, that's a funny coincidence, actually, because lately I've been doing these timed writing sprint things. I use this program called Cold Turkey Writer, which, if you're not familiar with it, it blocks out, and if you are, I'm going to say this for the benefit of the audience, it blocks out all your writing, and I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I don't have any sponsors, really, but they're really fun. They have a really good program, and it's free, last time I checked anyway. So it just blocks everything else on your screen for a set time limit or until you write a certain number of words, whatever you choose at the beginning. And in 15 minutes, which is the normal amount I do for my sprints I usually do about 700 words. It's kind of funny. Well, maybe a little less than that. Yeah. Lately.
That sounds really good.
It's pretty fast. I'm happy about it.
Cool.
But
sounds like a really useful program.
Oh, it is. It's really useful. Yeah. When I was dictating early in my fiction for a year or so, I actually missed it a lot. I mean, there's all this expensive dictation software and the microphones and stuff, but there's something just neat just about typing, and that's what brought me back to it eventually, even though it's slower than dictation.
Yeah.
It's actually not, but never mind that. It's slower to write, much longer to edit. It's faster to write, much longer to edit with dictation for me anyway. So flash fiction, back to you. Sorry. The flash fiction side of things, I just think those little bite-sized bits, you know, those little, you know, quick punches of story, because that's kind of what I do. I mean, I write out of order a lot, and so I feel like there may be some parallels between your flash fiction and what I've been doing lately, even though I'm writing a big old fantasy novel, and you know.
Cool. Yeah, possibly. I know I really enjoy writing them and reading them. I feel like they're nice little, it's a good amount to take in at once, I think. And you can fit a lot in, a very small space, so it's fun to see how much you can fit in there.
Yeah, it's surprising what you can do with a page or three. I mean, I write fantasy, and I also read, like, The Black Company by Glenn Cook, which I think he wrote that. There's some stories about how he wrote that, and he had a very disrupted lifestyle at that point. He was writing in breaks or something at work, and you can tell because there's frequently the story will be going in, and this happens like a couple times a page practically. The story's going one direction, and it's like, well, then that's kind of over, and we go another direction. Something else is happening. More than one event within a chapter, and maybe being on the same page. It's like more than one scene basically is happening, and it's pretty weird for a novel to be that way. And I assume, I don't want to assume, but is your flash fiction like that? Do you jump around a lot, or is it tend to be more, scene pacing, rather than kind of bouncing everywhere?
I think mine are, I think, a bit more focused. They're usually one scene or one little story. I don't think they jump around a whole lot within the pieces. Yeah, but the pieces in my book they're all linked, so they do. They jump around.
Okay.
the pieces themselves jump around to
But
follow
they
the
fit
storyline.
together. They're like a mosaic or something. Something
Yeah.
poetic like that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly like that.
So yeah, you say they're linked. Is there some kind? Are they linked by a theme or a setting or characters? What links these pieces in this book together?
Yeah, well, they follow one character. Her name is Alana. Throughout her life. Yeah, the story's about Alana and her sister mostly, and I mean it's focused on Alana and her experience of life and relationships and growing up.
Okay, so would you say it's kind of young adult based themed, or is it really more of the classic coming of age kind of vibe?
I don't think it's super young adult, but I guess it could be. I mean, the way that the publisher describes it is a coming of age and coming out story.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, that's yeah. So. I for some reason I lost the thread of my own thoughts there. It has nothing to do with what you said. It sounds interesting, and it's more on the literary side though. That's or literary. I mean, like what do you call that? Commercial literary or whatever, or mainstream fiction, something like that. But with of course the LGBT.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'd call it a literary book.
I'm sorry. I just have all these terms I like to add to things. Helps me keep things straight.
Yeah, that's fair.
But just because you like to name stuff doesn't mean those names mean anything, and that's frequently my issue with just putting words to stuff that I'm doing in the real world. Do you ever have that? Well, let me go back a second. So you're writing these flash stories. What is your process for writing flash fiction? I guess.
I guess one that I've found really helpful. I've honestly been struggling with writing quite a bit. I think mostly during the pandemic. But a big part of how I wrote a lot of the stories in Tiny Ruins was, I tried to be a morning person for a while, so I'd wake up really early, and I sort of did something similar to what you do, where I would just sit down for 15 or 20 minutes or whatever amount of time, and I just had to write something. And just keep writing basically until that time was done. And then, a lot of it was kind of garbage, but some of it turned into, little starts to stories or even full stories sometimes.
Yeah.
And then a big part too with flash fiction for me is the editing process, because it's, sometimes they're longer than I want them to be, and sometimes they say too many things, and sometimes they're not whole stories. So I try and get, I guess, as much as I can in there, and then sort of cut down until it's like a nice little concise length.
Okay. Yeah. So you cut. How many words are? Do you have an idea of how many words per individual flash story you're cutting? Out of the total, out of what you end up with. If you end up with 600 or 700 words, that's like about 2 or 3 pages, right? Most of the time, I guess, if you just use what I consider kind of a standard page length now, but whatever. Do you cut like 50 words, 500 words? How many words are you cutting a lot of the time?
That's a good question.
Or do you not keep track? That's fine too. Everyone has their own process.
I guess I don't really keep track of it. It's a really good question, and something maybe I should keep track of. A lot of them, I think, in this book in particular, are quite a bit shorter too. So I think a lot of these are like maybe even 250 or like 300 words.
Okay.
But yeah, it depends. I feel like probably 50. It might be an accurate guess. I'm not sure.
Okay, that's so you're not. Yeah, it's more honing than just like, oh, that didn't work, let's try again, basically, or let's throw it out. But I guess actually, let me think about it. But if you're cutting out 300 words, cutting down to 250, that's still a significant amount. That's a big chunk of that little bit. What do I know about word counts? I write epic fantasy these days, so big books. My new book is supposed to be like 150,000 words. Maybe it'll be longer. Who knows? All I know is I want it to be 88 chapters, which is a lot of chapters.
Why 88?
Oh, it's got significance in the story's world. So there's 88 greater beings in the setting, which are like demons or monsters or whatever. And those things are very important. And I kind of was thinking, what, let's try to do at least one book that where you got 88 chapters and they kind of all kind of key to one of them or something like that. I don't know. I don't think that's actually necessarily going to work out that way. I think it'll be fun to have a big long book though, and epic fantasy readers tend to appreciate that.
Yeah, sounds cool.
Yeah, I was just writing that today. I'm pretty happy with my progress. But yeah, anyway, I guess you so this is your first novel length work or book, I guess we should call it, right? Because it's more of a collection than a single story, right?
Well, I think maybe a novella is a good probably term for it, because it does follow one story throughout. And I think it could be a novel, but it's maybe a little short. It's only how many pages? 81.
Yeah, probably a novella. Novellas are nice. They have that's a good length for a story. And and I really like those kind of bite-sized stories, but I like a lot of different kinds of stories. I just like it when I write a story. It's so hard these days, but I like it.
Yeah.
You were saying if you don't mind me asking, you were saying you were having some difficulty writing during the pandemic. Do you think have you figured out any kind of tricks or ways to get back into it more? I mean, we have been in this pandemic for quite a while now.
Yeah. Honestly, I haven't. I have been starting to plan a new. I did try to do National Novel Writing Month in November. That lasted for 2 days, and then I stopped for some reason. But I feel like those types of things are really helpful for just getting you, sitting.
Yeah, a little bit of community. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit of encouragement from all sides. Yeah.
Yeah, I have been thinking of, because I know for me personally, like being in a writing group, or at least being, in some kind of organized situation with one other writing friend or someone who sort of, is expecting your work by a certain day so that you can exchange it and critique each other's work. I find that really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done that in a while either yet, though. But yeah, those are things I find helpful.
Yeah.
But I'm trying.
Go on. No, you go on.
I was going to say I'm starting to think about like my next project. So sort of thinking about it process and planning has been really inspiring. So I'm excited to write, to get started on writing it. Whether or not that's going to lead to actually writing it, though, I don't know.
Yeah, that's always the tough part, right? Because it's so much fun to do, kind of brainstorm and to think about stories, and then it seems relatively. I mean, to me, it's relatively scary to write them. Everyone has their own reason for the difficulties, but it does seem like there's a pretty common problem there, which is like, how do I get this? And basically, how do I get it out of my head and onto the page, kind of thing, or how do I make that as painless as possible or as enjoyable as possible? Really.
Yeah. Because
if it's just kind of painless. Well, I would rather be happy while I'm writing than be just like, oh, this is okay,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle a lot with the kind of, I don't know, fear of failure, perhaps, fear of screwing up the story. But the thing is, and this is just kind of my general kind of advice I tell myself that I'm still trying to figure out, trying to internalize fully, is that, if you've got the problem I have and you're stuck because you're worried the story isn't going to be as good as it is in your head, well, just, I guess the only way to do it is the story in your head doesn't really exist the way it will on the page. They're just going to be different things. Kind of like how a movie version of a book story is always different. You have to adapt it. So you got to adapt it from your kind of dream state, your mental internal logic, to a book that other people can enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and that's really the trick, or the craft part is how you do that, I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I feel like, I'm in that stage right now with the hopeful future book that is in my head. But with this one, I didn't have really a plan going into it. It was like I wrote it initially as it was my thesis project for an MFA in writing program at the University of Saskatchewan, and even at the end of that program, like I focused on writing flash fiction in the program, and I focused on I really concentrated on the form and like trying to put together a collection of these pieces that would make a book length project. But the actual story wasn't really there at the end of it. It was just sort of like I kind of felt like a jumble of these little pieces that were interesting and weird, maybe, but didn't feel like a full story until like a couple of years later. Okay. I just like sat on it for a while and worked away at it a little bit here and there, but yeah, it didn't start out really as like an idea that like, I'm gonna make this book that's about this, and
yeah, honestly, I find that having the direction that's too, because I also don't plan my books very much. I mean, I mean, because I'm now writing in series, and I'm writing my genre fiction type stuff. It's not, it's not exactly like I don't already have a guidepost, So, because, oh, jeez. Anyway, this Java popped up on my screen. I hope the listeners don't catch that, but I think they will. Anyway, so Java needed an update. But anyway, I was saying that when I think about when I think about structure or kind of what makes a story or like the theme of the story, the things that unite it, that isn't generally how I write a book either. I don't feel like it's actually helpful for me as a discovery writer, as someone who's discovering the story as I go, to know all these details about what the plot should be like and all that stuff. As long as I have an idea of what the structure kind of is that I'm hanging everything on, it'll all make sense eventually. And I can go back and make it make sense if it doesn't the first time through, which it usually doesn't. Let's be fair here. Yeah. So I guess it sounds kind of, maybe not similar to what you did, because you're writing basically more distinct pieces in a way that then fit together. And then you kind of revised those so they became a novella. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. Would you say that could you imagine doing a top-down approach to writing, I guess? Like, I have an outline and you write the story like that?
Maybe. I mean, in theory, it sounds like it would be really helpful. I just don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm sort of trying to do that with my next project. So I guess we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. So, not to pry or anything. I mean, you don't have to tell me anything about this new project if you don't want to. I'm just kind of curious. Do you think it'll be more of the same kind of genre, same kind of field as your earlier stuff, especially this novella?
Well, I am thinking it'll be another like novel made up of flash fiction, but maybe a bit longer.
Okay.
And I think it will be similar in the sense that the protagonist will be a queer person. Mm-hmm. But I think the content or the plot's going to be quite different. I'm hoping to include some like haunted house stuff and like maybe a ghost.
So a little bit of horror or urban fantasy type stuff creeping at the edges there.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it could be a friendly ghost, but then that's urban fantasy, basically. So there you go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's friendly yet or not.
Hey, it's one of those things you find out when you're writing sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, actually today, my writing session, I really discovered a weird scene I was not expecting. Like, I'm like, oh, this scene, didn't realize this scene would need to be in the book, but now that I wrote it, I don't see why it wouldn't be in there. It's kind of funny. That's what happens when I skip around in time in the book too, because like I have my big list of chapters, 88 chapters or whatever, and I'm like, maybe I'll write chapter 47 today for some reason. So I did, and it was kind of a big jump, right? I mean, I've done that before though. It was actually a book that I haven't published. It was my third novel that I finished writing. So I was 19 when I finished writing it, or not 18. I was still a freshman, first term at undergrad, and I finished writing this book that I'd started the year before when I was a senior in high school, and but one of the things I wrote when I was in high school was I jumped to the middle of the book and I wrote the midpoint of the book, like this big action scene in the middle of the book, and that was really interesting to go back to. I don't remember very clearly. It has been some time since then, but I don't remember very clearly how it motivated me. But I remember thinking like, now I need to just support that. I need to get there and make that make sense, right?
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah, I think that's what happened with Tiny Ruins too. I sort of was writing all over the place and then filling in the gaps later on, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, that is a really interesting way to do it. So, do you have all the chapters like planned out then ahead of time, or?
No, I don't plan out any of them. I just know that I just want to have this many of them. There's one, I kind of know the epilogue, because usually the epilogue has one of each point of view character scene in it, at least one of each. Sometimes there's a couple of one of the major ones, and one of each of the others. But because the book's going to be so long, I think that epilogue might actually be practically 2 chapters long. So it's going to be more like an 80, 90 chapter book, because the epilogue, I don't count it among the chapters.
Right.
And I wrote the first 40,000 words or so in order, more or less, because I was, but it's kind of hard to say exactly, because I barely remember that stuff. It's weird, because I dictated that stuff, and then I'm like, this dictation isn't working. I better stop. I better go start typing again. Even though I have, I dictated 2 novels, and they're okay at this point. They're pretty good, but they took so long to revise, and I realized I wasn't having as much fun dictating, so I decided to switch back to typing. And that was... But when I would dictate, I would mostly go in order. I think that's part of the reason I wasn't having as much fun with it, honestly.
Yeah.
Because, going in order, not really switching around much is a big... it's helpful for making sure the story makes sense sometimes to the reader, because then you're basically experiencing it as the reader is if you don't have a plan, right? You're just like, okay, then this happened. Got it, okay. But jumping to the middle, or even to the end, can be very useful to figure out where you're going. And that's the main reason I did it. I haven't written a whole bunch in the middle of this book yet. This is the first scene I've gotten this far ahead of where the rest of my story is,
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I definitely found that too. Well, I guess getting stuck somewhere too, like, if you're somewhere near the beginning and you don't really know what's happening next, it can be motivating to jump somewhere else and then try and get there.
One of the other perils of getting the other places you can get stuck, it's not really all that perilous, but it can be a problem, is if you get stuck at the same pacing. Like, books you can, this, I'm sure. You haven't taken an MFA in creative writing, right? But, you can, for the listener's benefit, you can dilate time, you can slow things down, speed things up, that kind of thing. And you can make a moment last for a long time in a book. It can last as long as you want, basically. A moment of time in the story world could be a whole page that the reader takes a minute to read, And that could cover a second or an instant. And that's really cool. But imagine being stuck like that for the entire novel. That'd be crazy. And the same, but I consider it to be almost as crazy to be stuck at doing the same, like a normal speed for the whole novel and not being able to speed up or slow down. You're just playing like a movie without any slow motion or any of that stuff or rewind. And that's, there's a problem there for writing fiction, or at least it's a limitation that isn't always necessary to heave to. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It makes me think too of like, with flash fiction, or like with my experience with it, like a lot of stuff can be, well, some of the feedback I've gotten too is, like, I guess, I don't know if pacing is exactly what I'm trying to get at here, but like, the stuff that's left out of the pieces and between the pieces are sort of, even though there's nothing mentioned, it sort of leaves it up to the reader to sort of imagine and propel the story forward themselves.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, must, it changes pace depending on where you are in the story and what just happened. But that's really fun part of it too, is figuring out how much you can leave out that's still sort of there in the writing without having to actually say it.
Absolutely. That, in like in visual art, they call that negative space, basically. The stuff you didn't draw that's telling the story of the piece or creating the image. And that's really interesting to me, because there's so many things you can do with the scenes or the moments of the story that definitely happened, but that we didn't go into. With the reader didn't really get those laid out for them blow by blow, but they know they're there. And that's a pretty powerful ability that kind of a magic trick among many magic tricks that writers can use.
Yeah, I find that part really a lot of fun. And seeing what people get out of it, too. And, I find that it's really helpful. It's another reason why I really appreciate doing workshops with people is, then you can see before it's published, like, is this actually coming through, or is it just in my head, and did I take out too much? Or
Yeah. There's always that risk when you're trying to write spare, I mean, it's like, did you make it clear and carry your point effectively, but then also not have a whole lot of words to it? Yeah, I imagine that is a great part of the challenge of flash fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never really written a whole ton of that myself. I've been writing novels pretty much my whole time writing, but it is really cool how you can do stuff like that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I would like to try and write like a more traditional novel at some point too. We'll see.
Yeah. Oh, so we're running a little bit low on time here. Thanks. It's been fun. But I do have one last question for you, and it's mostly along the lines of reading, because the show is alive after reading. So if you have any book recommendations or books that you'd recommend that influenced you somehow, let people know about them.
Yeah. Do you want one or two?
Just do one for now. Let's see how much time we have.
Okay.
I don't have one this week. I haven't been reading a ton. So there you go.
Yeah, I haven't been reading a ton this week either, but I have one in front of me that I really love and that was really influential to me with during the writing of Tiny Ruins. It's called Bottle Rocket Hearts by Zoe Whittall, and it's her debut novel that came out a while ago now. She's got a few other awesome ones now, but it's sort of it's similar in the sense that it's like it's a coming of age, like a queer coming of age story, and it's set in Montreal, which I really love about it too. Yeah, I'd recommend that one.
Okay, cool. So what was the other one you were thinking of? If you
Oh yeah, the other one I was thinking is it's similar to Tiny Ruins in the sense that it's called When I Was Young and in My Prime by Elena Muntz, and it's a novel, but it's written in like these very small fragmented chapters. A lot of them are, some of them are only a few lines long. A lot of them are flash fiction. Some are poems, some are lists, some are diary entries. But they all fit together to tell a story, and it jumps in character sometimes too. Like there is one main protagonist, but it's also about her grandparents, so it jumps sometimes to their perspective, which is cool.
That is cool. That kind of reminds me of what is it, Mama Day by Gloria Naylor. I read that back in undergrad, which has all these characters in it. I mean, like all these points of view, and it's a really cool book. It's like a generational family saga kind of thing. You just reminded me of it. That book doesn't sound that similar to Mama Day, but because Mama Day is like, it's all about this family and with these, these generations, kind of how they add up and what they mean to each other,
True, yeah. This one's it's very sad. I cried many times while I was reading it.
Some books, sometimes the cry is good though. Sometimes the heaviness is useful.
It was very useful, yes.
It's right sometimes, maybe more than useful, Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Nicole, thanks for being on the show. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It's always nice to meet a new author and a new fellow traveler, we'll say, on the road of writing.
Yeah. It was really nice to meet you too. So
tell listeners where they can find your book and any other fiction you have out there.
Yeah. Well, I have. You can buy Tiny Ruins through the Radiant Press website, or it's also available from your local independent bookstore or on Amazon. I do have a website where I have some. You can click like links to some other publications. It's NicoleHaldoupis.ca, and there's some magazines that have published my work, like Bad Dog Review, The Feathertail Review, Bad News, among others. And yeah.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. And once again, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks.
Now, as for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com, and that's cellar with a C. Have to remind people occasionally, and that's because it's a basement, people. It's a basement for minds. Anyway, and you can find my books on Amazon.com, and you can get the print books. You can get the print books wherever fine print books are sold online, print on demand books. But definitely check out. There's one you will not find for print on demand. But you can get it for free on either, or you can get it for free on, what's the name of that? Forget it. You can get it on Amazon.com now. It's called The Crimson Suitor, and it's the first book, the first little prequel novella in my epic fantasy series, the Demon Hunter series. So check that out, and you can find the Demon Hunter books right there as well. You've got a few other books out there, like Orphan Mage, that one's out. So thanks for listening, folks. Have a good week. Stay safe out there.
That tears it.